guys. I wanted to come back to Aristotelian Tragedy for a few reasons. One, your ability to address it in your essays or have an understanding of it would be impressive when you write, but also it's where we began. We began with the Greeks in this idea of tragedy, and it really is the foundation of literature, because literature is a way of addressing, understanding, and managing trauma, which is tragedy. So Aristotle has a very clear idea of it, and we have been living with this notion for centuries until Arthur Miller created the huge controversy that spiked so much argumentation about whether or not we could have the audacity to question Aristotle and what it means to have a modern tragedy. So Arthur Miller is very controversial and certainly a quintessential modern author, but I think he's most known for having been married to Marilyn Monroe. No, that's not true. He was married to Marilyn Monroe, but I don't think that's what he's known for. I think he looks like a happy man there. But he's very modern in that his content is mundane. He addresses social issues. He's passionate about that, and his characters are average. But in a lot of ways, he is traditional. And as you read his work and think about Aristotle, I want you to think about, how is his work traditionally tragic? How does it challenge tragedy? And why is this even important? Why is it important that we somehow come to some understanding of what it means to have a tragic life or to experience tragedy? Aristotle's definition, if we go back, is that tragedy is an imitation of an action that is serious, complete, and of a certain magnitude, exhibiting embellished language. That is the quintessential Aristotle sentence right there. And the embellished language implies that nobility, right? That nobility that we have, and that we have this high seriousness. But we are also addressing philosophical questions, for sure. And the questions are the ones that address the trauma in our lives that we all have. That why are we here, and where will we go, and what is my purpose? All of that stuff. Those questions that produce the tragedy, and I believe this is where Miller was going. And we also have these great decisions of consequence that we have to deal with. And I kind of think about Addie in this sense, because she is, I think, a tragic character who made decisions that were consequential in the face of her tragedy. Also, there's the catharsis, that idea that you come to the awareness of your shortcomings, because that's our weaknesses, and that's how we become better and stronger, is that we notice our flaws and we are challenged by them and we become better. So the tragic hero, if you recall, is this character, like I said, with the flaw, who comes to know himself. And himself would be also an operative term for Aristotle, because women did not experience tragedy prior to this, because they're not real people. These are the characteristics of a hero. Again, some more repetition of this fact of self-discovery, and that is really what it's about. And I think also what Miller is touching on, that self-discovery that we come to, or that we need to come to, because as a human being, and in a lot of ways it is our purpose. These are just more traits. You can come back to this in the other slideshow. But ultimately, I want to leave us with this idea of Aristotle's hero, much like Odysseus. It is not the world we live anymore, and I kind of want to support Aristotle in his questioning of this antiquated idea, because ultimately, for Arthur Miller, the tragedy is in our inability to justly evaluate ourselves, to recognize the indignity that we live with and battle it in the real world. And in a lot of ways, Arthur is criticizing the American dream, because the American dream was a set of ideals that everyone should fit into. And again, I think of Addie and her inability to have her own set of standards that she wanted to live by. She needed to fit this standard that was impossible for her. Also, in the United States, it was a time of prosperity, and the collective notion of the American dream was really about possessions. Did we have a Frigidaire? Did we have a house? Did we have that job? And a modern idea of American dream is really about satisfaction. Are we satisfied with our life? And this is a question that we're going to have to ask ourselves throughout life. It doesn't just end with my 18th year when I decide which college I want to go to. We're constantly changing. And I believe Miller would argue that the tragedy is in our adhering to a standard that doesn't work for us. And Addie certainly felt that tragedy. And as well, this idea of parents is important because we see Willie attach himself to a very false notion of success and the American dream. He went to that funeral and he recognized that if this many people would come to your funeral, you are a successful man. You're a successful person, and he just followed that trajectory, never once looking back and considering, is this a satisfying life? And he was so monomaniacal in his direction that he didn't stop to wonder what is pleasant or not pleasant about his life. And his children suffered that as well. Because Biff's idea, of dignity was to get approval from his father. His father set out an idea of what a successful young boy was, and all Biff wanted was his father's approval, and that would bring him dignity. And he realized that there was no dignity in that. So ultimately, I lost track of what I was going to say. I apologize. I'm moving on to the salesman. And I think it's important and interesting that Arthur Miller chooses a salesman. He chooses a salesman, not a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, a farmer. It's a salesman. And a salesman is a very specific occupation. So I'm just wanting you to consider why would he choose a salesman? And what is specific about that occupation? A salesman originated to get products to rural people. How do I get a vacuum cleaner to somebody? So they had a purpose, but salesmen really now today create the need often that you may or may not have. So a salesman doesn't really produce anything, doesn't really contribute in certain ways to society. And not to disrespect salesmen, I know many good salesmen, so I don't really want to disrespect them. I just, considering their contribution and what that is to the world, and why would Miller choose that particular character? Because the salesman is a very particular character. So as we read, I probably have already read, I want you to think about, what does it mean to feel dignity? Because our dignity is inextricable to the choices we make, and our sense of identity that we have in the world. And we are all striving for that. And are we striving for that in ways that have been told to us, or are we striving for that in ways that we are coming to with solid self-reflection? So that's all of the things that I would really like you to think about.